Hello, and welcome back to the Fractional Typology Project. My name is Titi Koshi. Today we're going to be covering Ladybug from Bullet Train and how they stack up in the four-letter system. So first things first, we have to look at their votes. So mostly they are voted as ISFP and ENXP, which is ENTP and ENFP combined. This is an interesting set of votes, and we will sort of splice up what's the key difference here. And the key difference is modern NE versus modern NI. Modern NE is concerned with abstract possibilities. It is a constantly doubtful and constantly evolving way of viewing ideas. Modern NI is a larger interpretive framework that attempts to take all ideas and knit them together into one abstract whole. If any of these ideas aren't familiar, please go back and watch the introduction to the FTP. This video is themed after the four-letter section. If you watch the four-letter section, you'll understand all the terms. Now, dividing between ENXP and broader NI users, INXJs, ENXJs, and ISXPs, dominant NE users are consumed by abstract possibilities. They are in a constant flux of doubt, constantly exploring abstract possibilities. That is not the orientation of NI users, who are guided by a larger abstract philosophy or goal. The reason this is relevant is because Ladybug operates from a large NI philosophy. Everything that Ladybug says or does in the series comes back to this broader philosophy. Now, to get into this, we have to talk a little bit about Ladybug as a character. So this guy was doing regular snatch and grab jobs. Okay, that was his specialization. And he met with a therapist named Barry. And Barry taught him this larger worldview of human connection. And for the entire movie, Ladybug continues to come back to this broad NI philosophy. This is not characteristic at all of ENXPs. If we go back here, we can see that dominant NE types are constantly exploring new abstract ideas. It is anathema to an ENXP to dwell on the same abstract idea over and over and over. I think it would be painful to do so. It would strike of the kind of routine that inferior SI involves that ENXPs inherently hate. So this is strong evidence of NI. Now, what kind of NI? So these are ENXJs and INXJs, which is two of the three types of NI users, not including ESXPs, who have NI last and therefore aren't active NI users. So starting out with ENXJs, ENXJs are four-letter extroverts, meaning that 2/3 of their functions are extroverted. Typically, they seek after some larger extroverted goal. So, for example, the White Death in this movie is an ENTJ, and the Minagishi Empire is his larger NI goal. And he commits to TE politics and tertiary SE forcefulness to get his larger abstract goal. This is not the way that Ladybug does things. Ladybug is all about snatch and grab jobs. Ladybug wants to get out. Ladybug wants to be free. Ladybug is a four-letter introvert that centers himself on his own, not in some larger enterprise. To contrast with this is INXJ. Now, there are two examples of INXJs in this movie. One is Lemon, who is, one of the twins, the one obsessed with Thomas the Tank Engine, and the other is the Elder, which is the older grandfather of Wataru, and both of these characters have broad NI philosophies that not only guide every one of their decisions, but they are also consumed in. Um, Lemon sees everything from the realm of Thomas the Tank Engine. It's like the only thing that he's preoccupied with. And the Elder similarly sees everything within the broader framework of fate. Um, Ladybug is not this way. Ladybug uses an NI philosophy, but is not consumed by an NI philosophy. And because of this, he is not an INXJ. Even in attempting to quote the NI philosophy that he's internalized, he makes frequent mistakes. He can't remember the wording of between us is a wall, but the wall is an illusion. The way that was worded to him originally in therapy is not a thing that he can easily recall. And that is indicative of someone that is not a main NI user. So, if not ENXJ and not INXJ, it would need to be ISXP. Now, there are two types of ISXPs. There are ISTPs, which lead by their internal personal logic, and ISFPs that lead by moral principles. Now, in terms of which of these Ladybug is clearly ISFP. Ladybug is immersed in his... Ladybug is absolutely immersed in the way that the movie greets him emotionally. His moral judgments on the way that other people carry themselves, his staunch pacifism as an element of his moral code, the way that he is emotionally overwhelmed with the prospect of being involved in the negative unfolding events of the movie, are all indicative of this kind of internal moral and emotional processing. Not to say that he doesn't make some sort of conclusions about the dynamics of the bullet train, but they are not guided by an internal logic above all. Not only that, but Ladybug does not have the inferior FE problems that come from committing yourself to that kind of logic. So again, to go through the functions, Ladybug showcases dominant FI through his commitment to pacifism and his immersion in both the moral principles he carries and his emotions throughout the film. Now, this affects him positively and negatively. He goes into the bullet train encounter with a lot of optimism about being the new and improved him, but then collapses into his negative emotions as things spiral out, breathing in and out of a pee bag and curling up in the fetal position. And this we'll touch on a little bit more when we get to inferior TE. Now, despite his pacifism, Ladybug is incredibly adaptable and adept at dealing with physical challenges. And that is an unlikely attribute for an INFP, which would be the FI alternative. So there's only two types with dominant FI, ISFP and INFP. INFPs have blind spot SE, and while they can be, controlled, collected, and organized, being physically adaptable in these kinds of ways is not a fluent or natural thing for people of that type, at least according to the narratives of typology. The way that Ladybug confronts the challenges of his environment are in stark contrast to that blind spot. Again, going back to his tertiary NI philosophy, he has a continued idea about human connection and meaning that he returns to again and again throughout the movie, which is evidence of NI. And inferior TE comes out in his executive dysfunction when he is wrapped up in his emotions and struggles to perform. Maria, Ladybug's handler, is an ISTJ, and she helps him to perform productively when he gets too overwhelmed to do so. and this makes them a productive pair when paired together. Now, getting into the questions and inconsistencies, because, typology is language. It is not inherent phenomenology. Ladybug is not an ISFP so much as we use the word ISFP to describe Ladybug. One of the bigger problems with calling Ladybug an ISFP is auxiliary SE. SE is not a thing that Ladybug likes to rely on, and the physical adaptability that Ladybug uses is not necessarily auxiliary SE. It's more so that dominant FI, or tertiary NI, and inferior TE are strong enough that auxiliary SE slots nicely into place, and it's not that egregious of a thing. Now, he also struggles with details. And you would think someone with auxiliary SE would be better with, getting a hold of their physical space in that kind of way. But you can make the argument that the rigidity of NI versus the fluidness of NE would carry over to the sensory dynamic, where Ladybug is adaptable with the sensory environment in the moment, but then struggles to keep it organized for long-term retention, meaning that SI users are better with details than SE users. But that's a claim that I'm actively improvising and not one that I think should be stood behind. Or at the very least, if that pattern doesn't reveal itself over multiple attributions, I don't think it's a substantive one. The other two are about the fundamental argument that maybe Ladybug is an ENFP. I think that ENTP is unlikely, given that I think Ladybug really does have consistent FI convictions. But you could explain his clumsiness via inferior SI. You could explain his difficult relationship with productivity as tertiary TE, and his moral convictions as auxiliary FI. I think the problem you'd run into, though, is that he does not demonstrate dominant NE. He does not demonstrate NE at all. In fact, I feel like there's a solid case for him being inflexible in the kind of way that a blind spot NE user is, because everything comes back to the same FI-NI philosophy, no matter what he confronts. So I think that because it's so difficult to make that kind of argument, that the argument for ENFP and ENTP slides more into the stereotype that, he is sporadic and clumsy and funny, rather than a demonstration of the actual process of dominant NE. Now, my favorite part of these videos, well, I also like the examples, but one of the really important parts of these videos is dynamic analysis. How does this type affect the other characters that this character interacts with? So, to break down the relationship between Ladybug and Maria, Maria is very confident in the way that she arranges herself and arranges the world. She acts in a very deliberate way to organize things the way that she feels they should be organized. And this causes a clash between her and Ladybug when Ladybug's moral convictions don't match what Maria views as wise or best. But it's ultimately Ladybug's helplessness when it comes to inferior TE that binds him to Maria and makes Maria more sympathetic to him. Maria has a conviction as to how things should be and how they should be done. And Ladybug does not refuse this. Ladybug begrudges, makes slightly different decisions, but not only does he fold into what Maria says he should do, but he is overwhelmingly grateful to Maria for this opportunity. There's a couple of things about Maria that are craving of a closer relationship, I think. LSE would make her suggestive socio-FI. I would also call her third emotion in attitudinal psych. What both of those mean is she does not want to focus on her emotions. She does not want to focus on connections. When Ladybug tears up at the end of the movie, it's very much like, what are you doing? Did you hit your head? Are you whatever? And she appreciates that he folds into what she wants him to do. And has difficulty with where that would go emotionally beyond that. But to center this on ISFP in particular, the shape of his inferior TE coupled with his moral principles that incline him towards listening, even if he can be stubborn at times, make them a good fit together, which Ladybug is incredibly grateful for. Now, the next analysis, the next comparison is with Lemon. Now, it's interesting comparing Ladybug and Lemon. Ladybug is, I would hesitate to call Lemon a good person. Lemon is very concerned with morality and moral standards. Part of the reason he loves Thomas the Tank Engine so much is because of the message, because of what it tries to teach about how life is and how life should be lived. Given this, you would think that his philosophy would be compliant with Ladybug's. And I think on some level it is. But the part of the side effect here is that Lemon is narrow-minded. NI users, if unchecked, can have a tendency to become so convicted on their own conclusions that they cannot see doubts and other reasons and other ways of being. Thomas the Tank Engine for Lemon functions as a typology system to allow him to quickly understand and summarize the dynamics of other people. And this allows Lemon to make these kinds of decisions and have certainty in them. He builds a socio-TI base system that allows him to organize the world and then acts on it decisively with socio-SE, with force, in a way that belies his own vulnerable socio-NE blind spot, having a similar struggle with his own convictions and certainty that Ladybug has. Because of this, Lemon immediately brushes off Ladybug in their first meeting. He brushes him off as self-aggrandizing and annoying, and then tries to pin him to the idea of being a diesel, which Lemon is very convicted on ever since the murder of the son. And Ladybug, in his own FINI conviction, struggles to understand where Lemon is coming from enough to adapt and better explain himself. And this only increases the degree to which Lemon latches on to that original poor conclusion. When actually their dynamics are a lot more compliant. And after the elder sort of talks to him and says, hey, you shot my son, are you really that different? Eventually Lemon, as difficult as it is, comes to apologize to Ladybug and I think sees in part that they are not so different, which is progression for Lemon. But the way that Lemon initially discards Ladybug is very representative of the rigidity of his own type. And the way that Ladybug does not catch on to this and does not thoroughly adapt is indicative of his own FINI conviction. And then comparing this to Tangerine, Tangerine is, to the degree that Lemon is introspective and considerate, Tangerine is not. Tangerine is what Lemon called a Gordon, someone primarily convicted with getting things done. Oh, sorry. The problem, though, is that Ladybug's nature, to the degree that Ladybug is pacifistic, is to the degree that Ladybug refuses to use force. That's all Tangerine uses. Tangerine lives in force. He is like an enforcer. So the fact that Ladybug continues to slip away without confronting Tangerine at all just makes Ladybug incredibly annoying to Tangerine. The fact that he continues to slip away, and the fact that Tangerine does not fundamentally understand Ladybug as a person, hits Tangerine in his own inferior NI, which is a thing that Lemon compensates for. Lemon reads people, Lemon has that active, predictive NI understanding, while Tangerine struggles to do so and seems to value it in other people, particularly in his brother. And Ladybug does not... Ladybug is quick, Ladybug is adaptable, Ladybug finds as many ways as possible to avoid Tangerine. And his whole specialty is snatch and grab jobs, so that's just what he fundamentally does. This FINI loop and avoidance of SE is not something that Tangerine comprehends. He just finds Ladybug annoying and just wants to kill him. So then we have the Prince. Now, the Prince is someone that Ladybug meets later in the movie after Tangerine tries to and then fails to kill the Prince because of Ladybug. Their dynamic is interesting. So, Ladybug is, I would say, a good person, and the Prince preys on people that would receive her as a helpless victim. One of the Prince's most tried and true routines is acting like a helpless third party that was taken for ransom or something or the other, and participates in that kind of manipulation. Because Ladybug is immersed in his moral principles, he can't turn away. And he doesn't have a good enough sense of the shape of other people, fundamentally immersed in his own emotions and moral principles, to recognize the degree to which the Prince is manipulating him. And this leads to a dynamic where the Prince plays helpless, and says, please use my gun to protect me, oh, don't leave, I need you, my purse is stuck. And Ladybug is committed enough to his dominant FI principles to follow along, and also struggles enough to interpret situations that are strategic because of his inferior TE, that when she makes a design of a situation, he can't really turn it down, especially not without Maria's help. So that gives them a very compliant and malicious dynamic that only gets interrupted because of the Elder's intervention. Speaking of the Elder and Ladybug have a couple of things in common. Ladybug as an ISFP is an NI user, and the Elder as an INFJ is also an NI user. And those two are some of the only characters that I would fully call good in the movie. Lemon flirts with it, Yuichi flirts with it, but these two, I have a high conviction, are good. Now, because of that, the Elder reads that about Ladybug and amiably talks to them. The Elder, as INFJs frequently do, is able to read the room, understand where Ladybug is coming from emotionally, and read that he is not a bad person. Read that the Prince did not have good intentions with him, and also that he is not only worth talking to, but also, would listen to what he had to say. It's a bit like pulling teeth because the way that Ladybug singularly pursues a narrative and mindset in an FINI way, blind spot NE, makes it very difficult for the elder to tell a story and then have Ladybug understand it or be willing to listen to it. But they click on that level, and the elder reads that, and they are immediately amiable from that perspective. Compare this to the White Death. The White Death is convinced that Ladybug is Carver, and so is immediately on the offensive when it comes to interacting with him. After he realizes that he's not Carver, the thing that Ladybug specializes in, his dominant FI, is something that the White Death views as irrelevant. The White Death functions very much in part because of the suppression of FI to engage in TE strategy. And even viewing the death of his own wife as a way in which he needed to exert better control and have better strategy about how he interacts with reality. And so the only thing that he encounters Ladybug as is as an annoyance, which is a very similar mindset to Lemon and Tangerine. There might be something to beta ST, which is SLEs and LSIs, which are both the White Death and Tangerine and Lemon. There might be something to the interaction with that because of a fundamental frustration with a lack of force and a devaluing of relationships and that kind of personal dynamic, which is, it hits that socionics cluster right in the super ego block, right in the vulnerable function and role function where they are sensitive. And so there might be something to that, but I don't know. Moving on, though, the last bit of our slide presentation here is examples of other ISFP characters. The reason why this is helpful is it helps you to compare and contrast Ladybug to that list and helps you to understand how ISFP as a term clumps multiple different psychological phenomena. This set of characters is a good set for ISFP, and they embody them in different ways. I looked very much into Ladybug to make this video, and I am not as familiar with all of these characters. But I can say that I have a decent trust that all of these characters are good examples of ISFPs, but in different ways. Ladybug is physically adaptable, while Natsuki is blunt and abrasive. In that context, SE means a different thing. Haru has the FINI conviction against the Fire Nation. Ian Gallagher pursues his emotions primarily, but in an impulsive way indicative of SE, which is another dynamic that SE auxiliary can include, but not in a totalizing sense, where it also would have to include characters like Ladybug. Joy from Everything Everywhere All at Once embodies an FINI philosophy with her embrace of nihilism, etc. Honestly, all these characters are good examples of FINI conviction, and of SE force, bluntness, sometimes suppression of that force, So, but that is it. That is everything. So, hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.